Hey YouTube, Case Against Faith here. First time I made a video in many months. And I'm making this video from, believe it or not, of all places, Serbia, where Yugoslavia used to be, part of it anyways. My company happens to have an office here, and so that's where I'm at. At any rate, so why am I doing a video today? Well, I had some spare time, and there's a subject that we're needing to talk about, and that is the subject of burden of proof. It seems like a simple enough subject that if somebody makes a claim and expects someone else to believe it, they have the burden of proof. Seems simple enough. And yet Christians seem to have the most difficult time with this. My comments in this video are aimed most directly towards David Funk, also formerly known as Anglican Apologist 72 and the Funky Theist. And also to a YouTuber by the name of Chipan9191, not sure if that's the right pronunciation, but anyways, Chipan9191 wrote some comments in defense of David's position on one of my videos, and so therefore I'm responding most directly to those two. But the same issue, Christians make the same mistake time and again. So this video is also aimed at any other Christian that can't seem to fathom the burden of proof. So let me give a little bit of background information first. David did a video a year or two ago, quite a while ago, about the alleged reliability of the Gospels. And I initially did a response series. I admit it was kind of snotty the way I did it, and I wound up taking that video series down and writing a more thorough and accurate written response. But in that original video series, I pointed out that his so-called documentary did some shifting the burden of proof. And that is, he would say things along the lines of, hey, if a skeptic doesn't believe this evidence I presented, it's up to the skeptic to prove me wrong. And I pointed out that that was a shifting of the burden of proof. He did a blog response to my video where he denied the charge and went so far as to say that, believe it or not, I was violating the scientific method by demanding that he provide proof for his claims. I was violating the scientific method. Okay. Well, at any rate, he's made that blog post private so you can't read it anymore. And I did a video response to that blog post. And that was responded to in comment sections by Chipan9191, where he was taking David's position. So that's why I've decided to make this video. But enough of the background. Let's get to the topic at hand. Typically, Christians will give some lip service towards accepting some burden of proof. They will present their arguments and say, well, yeah, see, I got to present that evidence for my claim, and here's my arguments. But then they will then say, well, if you don't believe me, you got to prove me wrong. And that is the crux of the problem. No, that's not true at all. So let me explain exactly why. What is the problem with this? Well, I suppose it might seem at first glance that a skeptic that disbelieves a Christian are themselves making a claim. The skeptic is not the skeptic claiming that the Christian is wrong, and thus doesn't the skeptic now have a burden of proof? The basic reason why this is wrong is that the skeptic is generally not saying that the Christian is for sure wrong. They're not making a knowledge claim that the Christian is wrong. They are saying that the Christian hasn't made their case. The only knowledge claim that the skeptic is made is that they know that the Christian hasn't given sufficient evidence to accept their claim. As Matt Dillahunty of the Atheist Experience likes to say, it's very similar to a court case where a defendant is found guilty or not guilty. Notice the defendants are never found innocent. Now, true, sometimes colloquially people will say that a defendant was found innocent when a jury returns a verdict of not guilty, but that is actually totally incorrect. The jury does not decide if a defendant is innocent. In fact, jurors may even believe that there's a good chance that the defendant is in fact guilty while finding the defendant not guilty. They simply have concluded that the prosecutor has not met the burden of proof that the defendant is guilty. That does not mean that he is innocent. It just means he was found not guilty. Imagine what it would be like if the defendant had an equal burden of proof to prove that they are innocent as the prosecutor does to prove that they are guilty. People would have to videotape themselves 24/7. What if right now, as I'm recording this video, there's a murder taking place and somehow I became a suspect of that murder? I don't have any way to prove that the time I'm making this video. I could show this video to the police or to the jurors at my trial, but they wouldn't know when I made it. Thus, the evidence to prove my innocence simply may not exist. If I had to prove my innocence, I may not be able to do so. Now, you may say that history is much less rigid than course of law. And of course, this is true, and I'll get to that more later if I have time. But the concept is exactly the same. A person making a claim, whether it be a murder case or a simple fact of history, the person making the claim has the burden of proof. Someone that rejects that claim, rejects that they have been convinced of that claim, whether it be a defendant or a skeptic of a piece of alleged history, the person rejecting the claim has no burden of proof. They are simply rejecting that the evidence is sufficient to accept the claim. Now, one could say that if someone both rejects a claim and also wants other people to reject that same claim, well, then the skeptic has some burden of proof to show why other people should reject that claim. And to some degree, that is true. For example, a defendant in a court case wants the jurors to reject the claim of guilt. So typically, a defendant will indeed present a defense. But the defense still does not have to prove that the defendant is in fact innocent. They simply have to show that the evidence that the prosecutor has given is not strong enough to convict. Again, the defense does not prove innocence. The defense shows that guilty has not been proven. Thus, while you might say that both sides of a question have some sort of burden of proof if they're wanting to influence the belief of other parties on the issue, there's a fundamental difference between the two sides, what the two sides have to do. The person who's making the primary claim has the burden of proof to show that the claim is true. The person rejecting the claim or wanting other people to reject the claim simply needs to show why the claim has not been proven true. That is a fundamental difference. Let me use an example, and I'll demonstrate this pretty accurately. Let us say that some Joe Schmo claimed he was abducted by aliens, and he makes a YouTube video about it. He brings his video camera out to a field where there are some indentations that he says is where the saucer's landing gear was. And say there are some burn marks, and you can see these burn marks in this video, and Joe Schmo says, well, that's for the rocket engines. The launch is right, and he might say he ended his video saying, well, see, I've got this evidence. If skeptics don't believe me, well, they're going to have to prove this is wrong. Come on. Is not the fallacy of that obvious? Would anybody buy this? No, they won't. Now, I might just strongly suspect that old Joe Schmo strongly faked it. I might believe that he intentionally made the indentions on the ground, and I may believe that he intentionally made the burn marks. But can I prove it? Probably not. Now, unless I happen to have a video camera out when he was out in the field faking his evidence. So now let me assume that I'm making a video response to Joe's claims. Say I'm telling people that, hey, Joe has not met a reasonable burden of proof of his claims, and therefore they should be rejected. The indentions and burn marks could be from anything. I might claim that I think Joe faked it, and let's say Joe then does a blog response to me saying, hey, case against faith. You didn't prove that I faked it. And I've got this evidence, and what do you got? Just speculation that I faked it. I've got video, I've got pictures, I've got burn marks, I've got indentations, and all case against faith has got is speculation that I faked it. Therefore, you should believe me, Joe Schmo, the man with the video camera. No. Just because me, case against faith, could not prove that Joe Schmo faked it does not mean that his case is stronger than mine. Now, assuming that I did make this response to Joe, I may well point out that since I can't prove that he faked it, then I have to admit that there was some possibility that Joe is 100% correct and there really was an alien chip and he really was abducted. Fine, but until Joe gives better evidence, Joe's claim should be rejected. That doesn't mean Joe is for sure wrong. It means that Joe hasn't proven himself right, and therefore his claims should be rejected. And if I were to respond to his cries about how I was just merely speculating that he faked it, I would say that, Joe, you've missed the point. That I don't have to prove that you faked it. Joe would have to prove that he did not fake it. As simple as that. So now let's talk about some Christian claims. Some Christian claims can be outright proven false. For example, young earth creationism can be demonstrated false. We know there was no Adam and Eve. We know there was no Noah's Ark, etc. So we can scientifically, demonstrably disprove some Christian claims. On the other hand, a lot of other Christian claims can't be proven false. I can't prove there's no heaven and hell. And therefore, to give full disclosure, I can't claim certainty that there's no heaven and hell, just like I can't claim with certainty that Joe wasn't abducted by aliens. What I can say is that the Christian claim that they do exist hasn't met a burden of proof, and thus such claims of their existence should be rejected, at least until such evidence comes forth. Now, I do want to discuss one specific claim that David had made, but David doesn't make, it's not just David that makes it, it's a popular claim by apologists. But it's one that 9191, whatever his name, defended him on. And that was that one of David's pieces of evidence that he gave in this video was that Papias says that the Gospel of Mark was written by Mark. And then he got this information from someone referred to as Presbyter John. We know nothing about Presbyter John other than he is an unknown and biased source. Never in history is a single unknown biased source ever given significant credibility. Not just religious claims, period. Biased sources, single, unknown, are not given significant credibility. Now, again, for full disclosure, I cannot definitively prove that Presbyter John is wrong. Sure, it's conceivable he was correct, just like it's conceivable there's a heaven and hell, and it's conceivable that Joe was abducted by aliens. So for full disclosure, I cannot claim knowledge that any of those claims are for sure false. But I can state that none of those claims have been given sufficient evidence to accept them. We know nothing about this Presbyter John, other than that he's unknown and by source. It's all we know about him, and that he apparently told Papias something. That's it. Now, there's a great deal of further evidence that I could present to show why it is even less likely that the Gospel of Mark was written actually by Mark. But whatever I were to say, no matter what I provide, a Christian can say that I didn't provide sufficient evidence. And then say, well, therefore, their claim should be accepted. Okay, so I say didn't prove that Gospel of Mark wasn't written by Mark, therefore you should believe me. No. Whether what I gave was a good reason or a bad reason to reject the claim of Gospel of Mark, until it's actually demonstrated to be with good evidence, then the claim should be rejected. Now what I'm going to do is play a short clip of David from a debate I had with him a couple of years ago. The debate is no longer available on YouTube. The videos have been taken down. But the purpose of this short clip is to demonstrate that David himself knows and understands exactly the points that I'm saying in this video. So here's the scenario. In the debate, I proposed a hypothetical. Say that I claimed that I'd flapped my arms and flown to the store, and say I even had witnesses to this claim. Should my claim be accepted? Should he believe me? Here's what David had to say.
I can easily propose that the 4 witnesses to Case Against Faith's flying to the store were incorrect via conspiracy or maybe some sort of trick that Case Against Faith came up with. Maybe he attached 2 motors to his feet, and these 4 witnesses didn't see those motors because Case Against Faith was wearing some special shoes that, covered them up or something.
Okay, so David says that even if I had witnesses to my claims, he could theorize that the witnesses were in error or in conspiracy, or there in fact was some naturalistic explanation for the phenomena, such as flying machine shoes. The first most interesting thing is that I didn't see him volunteer to prove those claims. He didn't say he'd have to prove that the witnesses were in error, or prove that there was conspiracy, or prove that there were flying machine shoes. He simply said that if he could offer up an alternative explanation, proven or not, that would seem to be all he would need to do to reject the claim. All he would have to do is find something else that seemed more likely, proven or not. But what is even more interesting is that he says exactly the same thing that skeptics of Christianity say. Perhaps the alleged witnesses were in error. Perhaps there was a conspiracy. Perhaps there are naturalistic explanations to Christianity's claims. All these possibilities and more are more likely than the Christian claims, even if unproven, because the Christian has to prove their claims. So once again, we see that Christians themselves understand the fallacy of their own arguments and won't accept the same arguments that they themselves use. Even if I had witnesses to the magic of flying machine shoes, he would reject it. And yet I'm supposed to believe his witnesses that he can't even prove ever even existed to begin with. Former minister John Loftus calls this the outsider test for faith. He asks the obvious and simple question: is the evidence for a religion what someone that isn't already a believer in the religion should reasonably expect in order to accept that religion? When I presented David with a hypothetical with direct parallels to Christianity, it failed his outsider test for faith, and felt he could reject it outright with no need to specifically disprove the flying machine shoes. Likewise, Christianity fails the outsider test for faith. The evidence does not meet the burden of proof that an outsider would reasonably expect. The burden of proof has not been met.